Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to talk to you a bit about how to create a B2B influencer marketing program to drive awareness plus growth. A lot of people think that it's just one or the other. So I'm looking forward to talking to you all about that. Just a tiny bit of background on what you'll get from today's session. First of all, what is influencer marketing for B2B? There's a lot of misperception about what influencer marketing is or isn't, so I want to clear that up. Second of all, why is it important? Then, how do programs actually work? I think a lot of people are doing influencer marketing but don't realize they're doing it. And so just to sort of talk through what typical programs would look like for you to formalize that. And then, a few case studies. I think that a lot of us can probably have an open chat about what we're doing. So that would be really great if you feel brave enough to sort of talk about what you're doing, even if it's just a little bit. I think that would be useful. And then your key tips to get started and optimize your program for the 45% that are interested in starting and don't feel that they have. So hopefully that's a good agenda. Keep it really informal. So please stop me if you've got a question. Just a bit about me. I was running Analytica, which is an influence marketing SaaS company in the B2B space, and really built that up over 10, 11 years. And so I've run programs for all of these brands on screen. I've been persuading Forrester and Gartner about the category, who should be involved, who shouldn't be involved. I've done so much education work around this that it was actually quite exhausting for a whole decade because the category wasn't built out. But it's given me a lot of insight into what has worked and what hasn't worked. And I've had to sort of live and breathe it for the best part of a decade. So hopefully I can impart some of that information there. I'm a non-executive director at advisor at Analytica, so I don't work for them. I'm a VP of growth for Clean right now. So some of these slides will be some of the Analytica content, but I'm just speaking to you as an individual who has had experience and just keen to chat and hear some of your experiences and how I can help. So just starting out, I'd love to understand how well each of you think you're doing in influencer marketing out of 5, with 5 being the highest figure, just to get a sense of in the room what
lots of people that aren't doing it. I think what's going to be super interesting, Tim, is at the end to find out whether people actually are doing more influencer marketing than they thought.
Exactly. Yeah, I'd love to see what because there's 110 not doing it.
Yeah. Okay. So we're not really getting any higher than about 20% score. So yeah, 1s and 0s. We can reevaluate at the end.
Yeah, perfect.
Just to confirm, you'll be happy to share the slides afterwards, won't you?
I'll be happy, very happy. So I'll share them straight afterwards with you. And that's actually quite useful because I think it's probably going to be higher than you think it is, but it's maybe not a formal program. So just to set the scene here, because I think it's really interesting to look at the timeline. LinkedIn, I think, started 2003. I remember the Del Hell, blogs in 2004. Facebook, Twitter. I was in the US wondering what Twitter was all about. I didn't even understand what they were talking about and felt really behind in 2006, 2007. Actually, if you look at Google search trends, influencer marketing as a term only really took off in 2016 and actually peaked in April 2020 when I guess COVID hit and everyone thought, what is our route to market? What is our go-to-market strategy? We need to go digital, online, and all these social media influencers are out there. And then obviously declined a bit, but has continually grown over the years. So there's been a massive growth factor since 2016. And that is just really interesting to see. And obviously there's a massive market category built around this with tons of vendors piling into this. So so that's really, really interesting. Why is this happening? Why is influence marketing effective for B2B? I think there's a number of things which are put on screen. There's just so much content out there. Everyone is a content creator. Everyone is an influencer. All of you are influencers in this chat. So it's just become so much more complicated. There's so many different channels and there's just so much information around. There's also a lack of trust. So I'll go on to talk a bit about that and talked a bit about the Edelman Trust Barometer. Advertising arguably is less effective as a go-to-market strategy. Sometimes we feel like it's a cost for ineffective content, but obviously advertising does have its place. So, but it's not the be-all and end-all. So we really need to find other tactics there. And brands, even if you're Microsoft, IBM, Hewlett Packard, all of these brands, you need to constantly reinvent yourself as a brand. And with the new demographics of audiences coming in, you're unable to reach them through traditional marketing and communications. And in B2B, there's so many people who form part of that decision-making process that influencer marketing can play a part in convincing all of them. So those are some of the challenges. And a lot of SaaS companies, vendors, especially when they're maybe starting out or up to sort of 20, 30 million, for example, in revenue, which I know is a lot of the Pavilion members, they're creating a lot of brand marketing content, but with very little engagement. It's being ignored and it's really self-serving. And we've got to change that. And influencer marketing is a great way of doing that. I talked a bit about trust, and credibility and trust, I think, is a key part of whether you can reduce the sales, increase the sales velocity, and reduce the amount of time that your deals are in pipeline. And influencer marketing can help you build that credibility and trust through third-party voices. So I'll talk a bit about that in a second. Here's the Edelman Trust Barometer. I don't know whether any of you have seen this before, but government leaders, journalists, CEOs are typically sort of least trusted from people, and that continues to sort of decrease. And obviously, so COVID had an impact upon this, because scientists in 2023 were some of the most trusted people. So that's interesting from just a general standpoint. But who are the most trusted people? They're people like ourselves. I mean, that's why Pavilion works really, really well, because you've got peers talking to peers, influencing each other. So people trust people in the same boat as themselves. Interestingly, they tend to trust their own CEO more. I guess you could argue each way whether that's true or not. You also trust your neighbors. So I just wanted to bring this out, because the whole point about influence marketing for B2B is to create content on a peer-to-peer level, not just trying to sort of broadcast messages to a lot of people. In terms of how the buying journey has changed and some of the influencer marketing stats around this, the global influencer marketing market value is $21 billion in 2023 and has more than tripled since 2019. These are B2B and B2C stats, so they will be skewed a bit more heavily to B2C, but there's billions being spent on influencer marketing by marketing executives, and 3/4 of marketing executives have influencer marketing in their budget for 2023. I haven't got the latest stats for 2024, but typically, and the feedback from you isn't surprising, that a really high percentage of people want to do it. They don't know how to get started or whether they're doing it already. So you are in really, really good company. And so part of what I'm going to show you here is some of the practical steps to be able to sort of take those first actions and to be able to try out a few pieces of content. So how would you define an influencer? I remember walking down the Thames in London, just randomly stopping people and asking how they define an influencer. It was quite fun. I created some video content on it and just stopped some really, really interesting individuals and asked them. And it was very insightful. I'd love to know how you define an influencer. Could you pop in the chat what you think the definition of an influencer is?
Oh, Tim, we'd love to see some of that video content later if you can share it. That would be really interesting.
Oh, I'd have to try. I stopped someone who said that he was really looking for his girlfriend, and I had a sort of a chat about how to help him, do that, and said, would you also be able to record a video for me? And it's a really interesting Scottish guy that I had sort of stopped down for the day, and yeah, just some really random stuff. So I'll be sure to send you the link to that video, as well as the deck straight after this.
Brilliant. I'm going to be really mean and pick on people. So Josh, I know you gave yourself a 1 out of 5. How would you define influencers and influencer marketing?
I guess for me, I look at it as someone who the people we want to sell to is listened to. So a sort of trusted and aware, someone who influences their decisions.
Very nice and succinct. Graham, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think when I've used influencer in the past, or when I've not used the word influence in the past, but done this kind of thing, it's been around people who have reach into an audience or industry that you're trying to sell into, as just sort of said, but have the ability to win people over or to validate what it is that you're offering.
There's some great ones here, Tim.
Yeah, I've seen it. I think all of them are extremely valid. Someone who generates interest in a brand through their established network, someone who's built trust with a significant enough audience within your target audience. I think that's great. Large enough following to monetize it for other brands. I suppose, Ingrid, what I would say to that is that, yeah, they become a professional influencer by trade. So I think you're extremely accurate in that description as well. So I think they're all really, really good descriptions.
And Tim, I love Seth Godin's description, which he calls them sneezers.
Sneezes, does he?
Yeah, which I think he started writing about probably before the influencer term actually came out. So yeah, that was his way of talking about them.
Exactly, and I'll give you my definition, and then I'll talk to you a bit about the problems with the word influencer. So when I was working, and a lot of my clients were global tech companies, I gave them a definition that sat outside of PR, analyst relations, and external affairs, because they'd already got those programs up and running. A lot of the companies said to me, oh, there are these anomaly people who influence my target audience and no one is managing them or speaking to them. So like, how do we change that? Now, these are global tech companies who are having to figure it out, but there's obviously influence in every single particular category there. So the definition I came up with them for them was an individual who is not a journalist, analyst, or politician, who is already managed by other teams and who influences a decision or change in behavior with your target audience. So it doesn't have to be a decision, it doesn't have to be buying stuff, but it could be a change in behavior. So I think all of your definitions were really, really good. What I would say is that I don't like the word influencer at all. I was advocating for influencer marketing as a category because that was great and it was building the category. But the term influencer causes a lot of problems. And there were a lot of brands who say, we want to do influencer marketing. And everyone said, that's a B2C thing. Can you get back in your box? We don't want to do TikTok videos for B2B. So I'm going to talk a bit about how you can talk about these particular programs. And I know that, Nicola, you've got an example of what you called them, and Graham as well. Just to talk about the types of influencers that are there, these are just a few examples. And Ingrid, I think you called this out, that there are lots of content creators now that do this for a living. They're just creating really, really good content around topics like sustainability or tech, fintech, cybersecurity, AI and ethics, or whatever your topical community is, or your topic that you build your value proposition around. There's a content community and lots of creators creating content in that particular category. They are really earning anything from maybe sort of $5,000 a piece of content up to sometimes $40,000 or $50,000 for big pieces of content or event speaking, and some of them are making millions just being like content creators in the space. So they have a living, and they are people that you would typically have to pay or activate with a really high value offering if there's no monetary exchange. Then there's industry opinion leaders and topical experts. Now, this is really where the magic happens in terms of who you can activate. These people wouldn't call themselves influencers, but you might call them influential experts. And they do want to be topical experts. They might want to build their brand. They might want access to insights. They have very strong communities. They might be interested in events. And they're influencers that you don't have to pay, and you can activate either through sometimes your own internal execs and subject matter experts, or you can start building content and making them the hero of your content. So I'm going to talk a bit about that a bit later on. Everyone understands, YouTubers and podcasters, there's certain channel specific influencers. There are also LinkedIn top voices as an example of that. And the last two are really, really key. So all of you on this call, you can play a big role in this, and you are influential, and you can be a key part of an influencer program internally. And you've also got subject matter experts across the business. Everyone's got customers here, and a lot of people talk about customer advocacy. You can turn your customers into influencers, and many people are doing that already. You're probably doing that, but you're not calling it influencer marketing. So all this can contribute to your influencer marketing strategy. And the key is to create an army of content creators that really work hard for your brand, so that you can leverage that content to drive awareness at the top of the funnel, but also start converting your pipeline and really building the demand for your product and category. There's always questions about what are the differences between B2B and B2C. Thanks, Nicola, for priming that question as well. I see B2C as product advertising, and B2B is much more about thought leadership. But it's thought leadership, with specific goals around awareness and growth. So I would just give a really simple definition on that. Are there any questions about B2B, B2C?
I know that Matt, who's on the call, he is currently doing some B2C influencer marketing, but not doing any on the B2B side. Matt, anything you wanted to share on what you're doing on B2C and what stopped you from doing it on B2B so far?
We've only just started it on B2C, slightly nuanced because we're a marketplace, so we have a consumer acquisition side, which our CMO looks after, and then there's kind of the B2B side, which I look after, and I have a marketing team in there. So we've just started it on the consumer side, really as a trial, like activating some of those kind of podcast owners or kind of social media people who will then activate that to drive the consumer activation. We're looking at it. The reason I joined this call was actually to look at how it might be relevant for us on the B2B side and what's different to the consumer side versus the B2B side, because I'm sure there is some nuance around it.
Yeah,
Right.
It's when I was at My Tutor, we had a marketplace, and we actually did more B2B influencer marketing using some of the schools that we worked with to host events for other local schools, and they did a great job of selling it in. But what we also found is that those B2B influencers, the schools, were really, really impactful on parents as well, because actually when we were talking about our brand and we had the credibility of schools talking about it, it was more of an impact than our parents, but we hadn't even thought about that initially. So I think sometimes we see them as very separate, and that is crossover in some of those marketplaces too.
Yeah, and I think B2B was around a lot earlier than B2C, but because B2C, there typically is more direct sales revenue attached to it, and so the ROI is much clearer. And B2B is a lot more nuanced and longer sales cycles that everyone feels much further behind in B2B. So I think those examples are really interesting, and that's why B2B feels way behind the curve.
And I think what you said, Tim, right at the beginning is that I think we're all doing more B2B influencer marketing than we think we are, whereas B2C seems very obvious, and B2B it can be a little bit more nuanced or described as something else, like, oh, we're doing some LinkedIn content thought leadership, which is actually potentially the same thing.
Exactly. It's a content marketing play, and I think when you look at LinkedIn job titles, you see tens of thousands of people with influencer marketing manager as their job title in B2C. You don't get too many people in B2B with influencer marketing titles. They're part of the marketing director, or they're part of the CRO remit. And so this is where it all gets a bit sort of lost, but people are doing it. So yeah, I'm really keen to sort of dive into that there now. I talked about quality thought leadership, and what was interesting is Edelman and LinkedIn did a big study of this. That the executives that we're trying to reach are spending a lot of time, 1 hour per week, like reading and analyzing this type of content. Even some of the highest ranked some key decision makers are spending that time. And if you're looking at middle managers, it's probably a lot more from that. But yet, since the pandemic, the amount of content has really spawned, and there's just too much thought leadership, and there's also a lack of quality, because 71% said that less than half of the thought leadership they were reading was valuable. So this is a huge opportunity for thought leadership, and I think that's where you can really drive the value. When we were looking at ROI for me as a SaaS brand, but also for our clients, what we were seeing is that there was up to 30 times awareness and engagement on social than any brand generated content. So just to repeat, the influencer generated content, the content where influencers were creating it, maybe we were producing it, but the influencers' voices were the ones really being showcased in the content. That content was driving 30 times awareness engagement than any brand content that we published. And it was the same for Analytica, it was the same for Microsoft or IBM or Ericsson, any of the brands that we were working with. There was also, up to 5 times demand generation or lead generation. I wasn't going to go into the difference between the two, but simple tactics like UBS having a podcast, trying to sort of sell some of their, trying to get some gated content downloads. They were receiving up to 5 times the number of leads when they had one of their execs appear on an influencer's podcast than them hosting the podcast and trying to sort of talk about their research internally. So those are just a few examples on this. It really can pay off. You've just got to start putting it into practice, and then you're measuring what is important to you as a brand. So it's about thought leadership. It's about perception change. So we were working with Coca-Cola, trying to help them change their perception that they were driving obesity through sugar and aspartame. And actually they were hiring a lot of academic experts to like peer-to-peer influence some of the academic experts out there and the journalists to say that they were part of the solution rather than the foundation of the problem. Microsoft were using lots of technical evangelists to engage them and to convince the other sort of tech evangelists in the community that they had better technology than Google and Apple, with their particular sort of products that they were selling. So it can be perception change. It doesn't have to be straight sales. You can also do it to focus. You can link it up to ABM programs, and I can talk a bit more about that. And you can also do it to access new audiences. So actually measuring whether you're getting through to a different type of audience rather than your existing audience that's pretty well engaged at the moment. In terms of how you actually run a program, just here's a simple 5-step approach. You first of all have to discover your community. So it's an influencer mapping exercise. So you can spend probably a couple of days, or someone can do that internally, using social media listening, using influencer marketing tools out there, to actually find out who are the professional content creators, who are the topical experts that wouldn't call themselves influencers, who are your customers that are influential. And even if the customers are not influential, they can just be leveraged to create content. And then you can help share the content through other influential channels. So they don't have to have high degrees of influence for you to be able to leverage them. And then obviously mapping out who internally could be part of your employee advocacy program. Even if people are not influential internally, they might be someone who could be influential in the future. So that discovery exercise of mapping that out is a really key part of it. And then you can work out how to activate the different segments. Then there's insights on there. So if you are looking at professional influencers, if you are looking at a lot of the topical experts, you can use social media listening to understand what topics they're talking about most. Or if you don't have any tools, you can just go on their feeds and you can start seeing about what hashtags they're talking about, and also what topics within your category are most discussed online. What you've then got is you've got an army of potential content creators. You've now got the insights on the topics that your customers might be interested in. You can also take the questions that your sales team are getting in their meetings, and then feed that back in. And then you get to the activation stage, which I'll talk to you about some of the tactics in a second. Then you've got to connect with the influencers and actually, start having a conversation with them. Once you build this up, it's about managing this, at scale. And then, of course, it's important to measure the effect, so you can scale up thereafter. In terms of what defines influence, there was really good comments in the chat just before. And I would say that there's three main metrics that you could use to start off. One is relevance. So are they talking a lot about your topic at the moment? If you pick something like AI, everybody is talking about AI, but are they actually an AI expert in your particular field? Then there's resonance, which is how much engagement are they driving through their channels? And this could be offline as well. It could be an event speaker driving lots of different engagement, and then reach their audience size or potential capacity to influence. The other part is, are they just a good content creator? You might have someone internally who creates amazing content, but if they post on LinkedIn, it wouldn't do anything. So they're also really good people to leverage. And then there's channel specific location. You mentioned, Nicola, about, if you did something in the Middle East and whether US celebrity influencers were going to influence that. Of course, if you were launching something in the Middle East, you would probably look to a Middle East influencer to be able to influence that particular region. And then how is their audience broken down? You can break down audiences more easily on Twitter, on Instagram, for example. Some channels, it's really hard to break down the audiences in terms of roles and location as well. I know there's quite a lot of chat, Nicola, at the moment.
It's just updates. We've got one question for the end, but I was just adding in as well, Tim, that particularly with internal influencers, it's about consistency, because what I find is you get some like, yes, I want to start posting on a regular basis, and they'll do a month with a flurry of LinkedIn posts, and then they disappear, not to post again for another 9 months. So a lot of it's about consistency.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Your employees are the biggest asset that you've got in this particular program. What I would say, and I'm trying to encourage Clean to do this, the company that I've just started working for, the key is, can you run a session to help the employees realize that they want to do it by themselves? If you start saying, hey, we would really like you to post content about our brand, would you be able to do this, and start like encouraging them to do it? They'll do it for 4 weeks, like you said, Nicola, and then they'll stop because they might not have the consistency, but they don't have the motivation. Start off by creating a session about developing a personal brand, and make it an opt-in program so that it's not compulsory. And as a marketing team, as marketing department, invest time in helping people build their personal brand. Ask who influences them at the moment. Ask them what they want to become and what topics that they would really like to be known for, and make it more about how you can help them in their career, and carve out time to help promote them as an individual. If you take that particular approach to employee advocacy, you'll start having people who are very, very engaged, who are really putting their heart and soul into this, and then other people will join that program. And I've seen a lot of B2B SaaS vendors, you pay lip service to it, but not really do it in the right way. And it never really takes off. Just going into the activation parts here, we've talked a bit about how you can activate influencers. You can have an always-on social outreach program, and some people do this automatically. I remember when I first started at Analytica, I would just be on social, chatting to the influencers and just building relationships with them on a peer-to-peer basis. So a lot of you might be doing this. A lot of your C-suite management might be doing this naturally. Maybe they're doing nothing on this. And of course, you can always get on people's radars and add value to their content. You can comment on their posts, and the ones that are really influential, you can start gaining some of their audience through that. So creating content is not just about creating an article. A comment on a very successful post is content in itself, and that's a very effective strategy. So some people do that organically. It's obviously really good to be able to do that as an organization. Number 2 is employee advocacy. So we talked a bit about that, and I'm going to go into detail about how you can connect some of the execs and subject matter experts to your external influencers. Number 3, you can actually have a formalized program. So Nicola, you talked about celebrity accountants. Graham, you were talking about MVPs, like the most valuable people at Microsoft. These are formal programs. IBM had their futurist program. And so you can see that people call them very, very different things. They actually create a formal program and they say, right, we're going to be doing this for you as our influential community, and we expect this in return. So it's kind of a formal tacit agreement. It doesn't have to be a contract, but it's something which you're actually talking about being a program, and you're making it almost like a VIP access. So a lot of brands have success doing it that way. The 4th one is influencer generated content. So if you think about any of the content you might be producing, so you might think, actually, I'm going to do a blog next month, but instead of talking about a cybersecurity challenge which you might be able to solve, maybe you outreach to the top 15 cybersecurity influencers and ask them for quotes on how they would solve that particular challenge. So instead of thinking, right, we're going to write the content and we're going to show that we're the best at this, you reach out to influencers and ask them to create the content, and you promote the content and make them the hero of your content. So that's an example where you can flip any of your research reports, ebooks, blogs, LinkedIn videos, webinars, all of that. You can say, okay, we're going to stop talking at our market, and we're going to start leveraging the best voices there. That could be a customer, that could be a key industry expert, it could be a paid influencer, but we're going to get them to create the content, and you as a brand are just facilitating the content creation, and then you're promoting it within your channels. And there's obviously various different ways to be able to do that. Events are a really good way as well. So, and you can tie in events with influencer generated content. So at Clean, like we ran an event the other day, CFO event, and we just invited 30 CFOs, retail CFOs, and we got one of the retail CFOs to talk at that particular event. But we created content at the event, and really all of them were influencing each other, influencing the community, and that's something that a lot of you will probably be doing anyway, but just might not be calling it influencer marketing. You can really scale that up, by adding extra influencers through your discovery and mapping process at the beginning. I put product gifting. It's less relevant to B2B, but there could be some B2B products where you actually give them a trial or give them something for free. And that still has relevance in there, but obviously it's more of a B2C tactic there. And there's lots of influencer seeding companies now in B2C. There's a great company that I was doing some advisory work for called Gifter, which is doing a lot of product seeding and gifting to influencers and creating thousands of pieces of amazing influencer generated content off the back of that. The 7th part is you can literally just pay people. It's not my recommendation, but there are some brands that just are not at that stage where they don't feel they can create the content, and someone needs 3 or 5 grand to be able to sort of turn up to an event, create content, create some blogs, create some videos, and maybe you just want to pay them and just start building some kind of awareness there. So there are people that will do it for money as long as it sort of fits within their topic. And if you're not set up, and if you don't have great ways of delivering value and insights and promoting the content, then straight payment is a way that I've seen some B2B SaaS vendors also activate them. I can see that there's a message from you. You're just keeping the chat going, Nicola.
I'm just giving some examples of what I think might be relevant, because I do think in B2B, it really depends on what you're offering. So at My Tutor, we gave free tutorials to schools that hosted events for us. And at GoCarders, we had a reduction on fees. So often that is, you can be as effective as in B2C with that, your product offering and your gifting.
Yeah, that's a really, really good example. So it really does depend. And I think it's just carving out the time to think, what's in it for me? So this particular question, a lot of brands don't do influencer marketing well because they don't think through this particular stage. everyone says, yeah, I'm sure we'll give the influencer value, but a lot of the influencers that are being approached day in, day out, some of them, the top ones, are getting 50 requests per day, and a free ticket to an event doesn't cut it. But still, B2B SaaS vendors are there saying, oh, we're going to promote the content, so they'll get visibility. I mean, how much visibility will they get? They're giving up maybe 3 or 4 hours of their time. They're getting a lot of people that may pay them to do that. So are you actually going to give them value?
And I think, Tim, on that space, it really depends on how competitive the market is. I'm seeing so many cybersecurity companies at the moment go after CISOs, and getting free access to their product is just like, well, that's by default if you want me to write about it. So there, I think it is you probably do want to look at a paid for partnership there. And often they're actually employed as part-time workers there. So I've seen several cyber and fintech brands actually employ experts in that space.
Exactly, that's a really good example. Feel free to share a few examples of your category, your thought leadership topics or products, and then we can obviously have a chat around what you're doing. In terms of some advice, when I was running surveys for influencers, so this was based upon 350 B2B influencers. The influencers that are doing this on a regular basis, they don't really love one-off engagements. So they love the feeling that this will be part of a relationship that they can build with you. The other part is do a bit of research on the influencers. It sounds stupid, but knowing that they're a really big influencer and saying, hey, we've got this big piece of research. Hey, can you just contribute to it? You need to go a bit deeper to be able to understand what they're interested in. A lot of them might be writing books or trying to raise their profile in a certain way. So you can actually have a conversation and find out what they're doing, and you can help them in that. There can be a quid pro quo. So just having a conversation with them can really give you that relationship that you're seeking. The other part is when you ask them to create content or have collaborative co-creation of content, don't write the brief for them and tell them what to say. That is like a complete no-no for that. If they are content creators, then talk about a topic that you want to really talk about. So for example, Clean were doing something on AI and inventory management. So if I was going to influencers and saying, okay, we're going to be talking about all of these 10 points, and can you give me exactly a point which speaks to this, is a bit too closed. If you have a conversation to say, hey, we're going to be talking about this particular topic, and these are some of the insights we're going to share, could we jump on a call and understand what your perspective is and what you would like to write about, and just have a quick conversation? Then you can start incorporating what they really want to talk about and see where the sort of common ground is. So those are just a few ways to engage them. In terms of the types of content that you can create, it literally is any of the things you can see on screen. So you could get 15 quotes to a blog, and then promote them as part of the influencer contributing to that content. Hopefully they will share it on their LinkedIn channel or other channels as well. And that could be really effective content. It could be a Q&A video where you're interviewing them or they're interviewing you. It could just be a discussion panel. Where I've had really good success is where there's a customer, an analyst, and an influencer or industry expert. Then you've got the mix of all of these talking as part of a discussion panel. And interactive ebooks, instead of writing all the ebook yourself, you can have dedicated pages in the ebook to each of the influencers, actually calling out their perspective and promoting them, so that when you publish the ebook, you can, in subsequent weeks, you can then share each of their own perspective on the ebook as something that they would typically share within their network. So there's lots of things that you can create. I think the key things to consider are, what do you have resource to create internally? And if you've got resource to create content, but just lack the opinions, then it's a really easy way to slot that in. If you don't have the production resource, then you might want to pay influencers to be able to produce the content as well, and then to run that. So it just depends what you're looking for. But there's lots of different ways to create content. So really what we're talking about, there's a revolution from brand to influencer content. And what I would suggest for each of you is that whatever content you're producing, just have a think about whether it's leading with third-party voice or whether it's leading with your own brand voice. It's so much more influential if you get the third-party voices involved and the hero of your content, because then they will want to share it with their networks. And if you get multiple influencers involved, then it will have that halo effect and it'll start rippling, through the social channels as well. Also, you're developing relationships with them and making them feel good. And so you create this advocacy strategy for yourself as well. In terms of a case study of how I did this personally, I just wanted to share, not because I'm trying to blow my own trumpet. I don't think I did anything really special, but because I knew nothing when I started at Analytica about influencer marketing. And I realized that a lot of the experts, some were in the UK and some were around Europe, but a lot of them were in the US. So I just went and met all of the topical influencers plus the experts in influencer marketing, and just went around networking and made sure that I built relationships with the top 100 people. We then started promoting all of those key influencers. We created lists of influencers. All of our content was written by influencers, but we were curating it. When we produced ebooks or any thought leadership material, it had about 50 plus opinions from all of our community. Every single week, I created how-to videos on LinkedIn, and was regularly getting about 10 to 15,000 or accessing 10 to 15,000 people per video rather than speaking like directly in meetings. I created monthly LinkedIn lives with our influencers and with our customers, and I brought in partners as well, which was really key. And whether I call them social advocacy chats or customer chats, it was really just creating a ton of content with other people, and I was really just interviewing. We created a lot of guides, research, like leveraging this community. They were very, very generous to us because we'd built them up and we'd made a lot of their careers, and they gave back to us as well. And just with my own content, and this is just me, I'm not really speaking for the whole of Analytica, I was getting 2 inbound opportunities per week, which were regularly turning into clients. We spent 0 money on advertising, but we built a global brand. And I remember there was someone in a friend of mine in a meeting in LA talking about whether they should invite someone to certain events who was on our Analytica list or not. And basically we were influencing a lot of the decisions made in California about who was going to certain events or not, just by publishing content about who the thought leaders were in that particular space. Now, I'm not saying everyone go and create lists of influencers, because it's now a tactic which is used by a lot of companies, but you can start really leveraging the experts and you can promote them in slightly more elegant ways, now that there's a bit of a saturation point in terms of like the lists of key influencers. But what it showed is that we only had a marketing team of 1.5 at that point, and we were influencing a lot of stuff that was happening in California. Brand credibility and trust was really, really high. And so the conversion of our pipeline was really, really good. We had a community of 10,000 influencers plus experts in the space, and we were really helping to sort of drive the category forward. And there was a culture of all of the employees creating content. So I didn't have to push that. That was something that just naturally happened like throughout the organization, and that really helped us have an effective go-to-market strategy and keep the cost down. So that was my own case study. I didn't do anything special apart from realize that I didn't have the knowledge and expertise. And I just thought, I can't do this all by myself, but I know that there's amazing voices out there. So I'm willing to put the hard work into the content creation, and how do we leverage that expertise? Now, over time, I became more of an expert, and then, the people that I was trying to introduce myself to at the beginning that didn't have too much time for me, then invited me on their podcasts, sort of 7 or 8 years later. So, this is this is something that anybody can do, and I think that as executives, as CROs, as CMOs, I think you can really help lead this along with management.
I
So-
think, sorry, I was just going to add in here. I think also in a way it's easier in B2B because there's less competition. I mean, when I first started at GoCardless, I was similar to you in that I didn't know anything about accountants, so I needed to upskill pretty quickly. And what I did is I would just went along to events and looked at who was speaking and talked to all the accountants I could at the event to find out who were like the digitally savvy accountants, who were the up and coming ones. And then I just spent time with a whole range from very small, just set up their own accountancy practice, to some of the larger ones, to the ones that tended to headline on stage or be talking about very interesting topics. And what I found also was a real benefit for growing your influencer base was that they never really spent any time together. And they actually loved the fact that I would bring them all together to share their experiences and their thoughts and their feedback on GoCardless. And really, they just couldn't be bothered to organize it and often didn't have the confidence to do it. So providing I just created a monthly meetup, which was over breakfast, and we just went round all the bars at King's Cross, all the breakfast places. I would get everyone together at about 9:30 in the morning. They had to answer 3 questions from me, and then I would just spend some time hanging out with them, and we might be talking about their families, we might be talking about accountancy challenges, and then I would usually just leave them to it and pay the bill. And they would stay for another hour or so just hanging out with each other. And so they actually found me really useful at just organizing their own mini events and paying for them. So don't underestimate in the B2B world how valuable that can be, bringing CISOs together or other particular groups from industries that don't usually get the chance to catch up and interact.
I think that's just such a perfect example. And when I speak to B2B brands, sometimes they say, "Oh, well, we're not quite an expert in that particular space." You don't have to be. You have to realize what's in it for the influencer. And as Nicola said, peer-to-peer networking and events, and it is a great example of getting a community together. So I advocate community 100% for the sort of content community commerce kind of model, and that fits so well into B2B that each of you could start off doing influence marketing, and just based upon the level of knowledge, expertise, and resources you got internally. Thanks for.
Sorry, just one last quick addition there. I also find I'm working in the publishing space at the moment. I've never ever worked in publishing, but I find just reaching out to people on LinkedIn, I would say I get about an 80% response rate, which just astonished me. So don't be afraid just to reach out to people and just ask for a chat and say you want to, being really humble, like I'd really like to learn more about this space. Yeah, I find you get really positive reactions to it.
Yeah, it's great. And really sort of thinking through that, what's in it for them. A lot of people like to give advice. And yeah, that's obviously a key motivator that you've drawn on, Nicola. So really it's about community, it's about peer-to-peer, and this is the future of content marketing, I think, from an influence marketing perspective. In terms of measurement, this is something that everyone, it's just the Wild West in terms of measuring this. And it depends what your objective is. It could be brand awareness and perception, top of the funnel. It could be trying to drive impact on your event. It could be account-based marketing. It really does depend, but you can put some metrics here. You could even start before this to just give yourself a metric, which is the number of brand advocates you're building. That's a really, really good metric that isn't linked to revenue, but it's a really good indicator of whether your program is going well. Then it could be volume of influencer brand posts, so how many influencers are actually posting about your content. So this could be you creating a blog post featuring 15 influencers giving their quotes and contributions. You could create a social card for them with a link to your blog post and send it to the influencer and see if they post it. If all 15 post it, then you're going to be getting some great engagement on that, and then you can start commenting on it, and then suddenly you're off to the races, and you can start seeing which ones do better than others. You can look at volume of employee brand posts just in terms of activity. You can then start looking at engagement, and you could look at brand share of voice. I mean, the bigger brands start doing brand share of voice. You could obviously look at that through social media listening, through who is who is driving more awareness and debate versus your competitors. Start looking at reach. Obviously, audience engagement is key, but there could be audience engagement at an event. So it could be 50 people you invited to an event where there's been 3 or 4 influencers creating content. So I think it's important to be intentional about this. But what I would say is that if you commit to an influencer program and you have great content creators and they're creating content for you as a brand, and you're segmenting these into bite-size, social videos or snippets that they can share, you will drive a lot of engagement, and then your sales teams can start sharing this content with their prospects, and it's just drives so much impact internally. And there's lots of things which are unknown. There's things like dark social, which play a big role in this. When people start sharing it by email, with their peers, you won't be able to track that. But it'll have come from the influencer content. So the CFO community that Clean have just created, we're just starting out, but some of the emails, I know that some of the CFOs have shared it with their CFO peers. I'll never be able to track that. We'll never be able to really know whether they've come in through different channels, but we just know that by leading with influencers and promoting the community, then this is starting to increase as a as a number of people within that community. If you're looking at account-based marketing, you can set up specific sites, and you can obviously track the site traffic to those, and you can look at the sort of influencer shares of your brand content. What I would say is I'll share this deck. If you want any advice on what metrics to use, then please reach out. And I think you just got to connect. You just got to connect your journey together to see what matters to you and see whether you can measure it. Moving on here, I just wanted to give you a practical example. This is also for the deck that I can share afterwards. But when you're creating a research report or white paper or ebook or anything like that, then there's a simple 5-step process. So I talked about picking 10 to 15 influencers. You set up calls with them to talk about the content, talk about what's important to them, and then agree what the ask is. Try to make it really light touch. Don't ask them to do something for 4 or 5 hours. Make it really light, and maybe interview them for 10 minutes and then write up the content and say, are you happy with this particular write-up? So take the hard work out of it. Then manage the influence relationships when you're creating the content. Share the content when you're publishing it. Let them know when you're going to publish it. Create social cards for them so that they can actually promote it, and it can be something that actually drives value for their audience and their career. And then launch the piece of content. So that's just a simple 5-step process. And if you do that, you can achieve some really, really good results with downloads or impressions or engagement, whatever you're trying to get from this. Just a couple of other, I think I've got like 1 or 2 more slides. With your employees, this is a model on the bottom left for Tribal Impact, a partner that Analytica worked with that drive employee advocacy. And Analytica's influencer personas are on the top right. Your internal experts, some of them might be great salespeople that are typically really good connectors, but they don't create their own content. You might have some social media enthusiasts on the bottom right who are really good at sharing content, but they just don't have a big network. Everyone's going to start at a different point. The point of employee advocacy program is to help them develop towards the top right. So if you're an enthusiast, maybe you can become a thought leader. If you're a collaborator, so you've got a high network when you're reading and sharing and engaging content, how do you become an influencer? So it's about moving them into certain stages and then trying to co-create content with your influencer personas. So your internal thought leaders, you can connect them up with the industry experts and that they can co-create content on LinkedIn. And that's a really, really good way of meaning that you don't have to pay for content. You can actually just run influencer marketing as an organic relationship-based and sort of content creation exercise. So this is a model that works really, really well. And the internal participants are typically the execs, intrinsic value for them being on social and doing this. then your subject matter experts across all different departments. Sales, it's more of a social selling exercise, but they can also share the right content from your influencers with their prospects as part of an ABM strategy. And then there's general employees that might want to get involved in this and start driving influence as well. The co-creation part is
We've got
really linked.
2 minutes left, and I'm just wondering if we share the last couple of slides. And I know there was 2 questions that have come up.
Yes, exactly. Would you be able to read me out the question, Nicola?
Of course. So David, you had a question on ABM. I don't know if you want to come off mic and just add anything else to it, but how does an influencer program really support your ABM strategy? I don't know if he's here, but yeah, just anything you could add to him about any influencers for ABM in particular, where you've got a very, very defined accounts that you're going after.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would pick sometimes they're sector specific or around a specific category. It depends what the average order value is and what your sales cycle is like. But what I would say with ABM is the one thing you should focus on is creating compelling content. Whatever program it is, once you've created compelling content, I think it's then about, how you share that with your ABM program. So it's just to add more value to your existing ABM outreach. So if you have amazing content from an influencer and an industry expert, maybe a customer, and there's some really great video content and it's broken down into some bite-sized chunks, you would want to build that into your sequences. You would want to put that into your ABM landing page. You'd want to incorporate that with your outreach, your personalized outreach to certain key accounts. You could also bring them to events and get the right influencers there. So I don't think it's about revolutionizing the process of ABM. It's about building credibility and trust with those segments of customers.
That's great. And Tim, I actually think in some ways it's easier with ABM because you're so focused that you can be really, really specific on who are exactly the best influencers. Sometimes it's your existing customers because they're in a very similar space that can work really well, providing they're not competitors.
Exactly. When we were going after IBM, we created a lot of content with IBMers, and they shared all of that content on their channels, and we upsold into those accounts because of that content. And so it can be very simple, like that, or it can be obviously, like a certain segment.
Tim, I know most people are going to have to drop off now, so I just wanted to say thank you so much. The slide deck was unbelievable, and I've already had messages saying I need to go back through this. There's so many great examples and content in there. So what we'll do is when we send these out, we'll also, if it's okay, to include your LinkedIn. And if anyone's got further questions, are you happy for them to ping you a note on LinkedIn too?
Of course. I've got a QR code here. If anyone wanted to take a photo of that and connect on LinkedIn, I'm really happy to answer any questions. And thank you for setting up the session, Nicola and Graham.